Hello, and welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. I'm Governor Tom Corbett, filling in for Terry Madonna, who's off this week. Terry was nice enough to ask me to guest host, so I'm looking forward to filling in for the next half hour. We'll be back in a moment with this week's program.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. I'm Governor Tom Corbett. Terry Madonna is off this week, so I will be your guest host for the show today. My first guest I want to welcome this morning is Pennsylvania Secretary of the Department of Corrections, John Wetzel. Secretary Wetzel has worked in the corrections field for 2 decades, starting as a prison guard in Lebanon County and working his way up to warden in Franklin County. Secretary Wetzel, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, Secretary, you were on the transition team that I established back at the end of last year after the election, and you reviewed the state's prison system thoroughly before taking office. And based on that report, I'd like you to tell me what are the top 3 things that we are doing and you can do to improve Pennsylvania's Department of Corrections.
Okay, yeah, during that process, which was, as you know, an intense process and a good process, we were able to collect a lot of information on what the issues were. And really the 3 that bubbled to the top were pay compression for management employees, population management, which equates to budget management, and improving the community corrections system. I'm happy to say we've been able to make progress in each of those so far in our 6 or 7 months here.
Well, tell me a little bit more about the community corrections system and what you feel needs to be done there and how that's going to help the overall system.
Well, generally, we need to do a better job with reentry. We need to create an environment where offenders can reenter society and do it more successfully. And when I talk about reentry, what I'm talking about is offenders reentering and being less likely to commit future crime. And the community corrections system is basically our vehicle to do that. So in order to have an effective community corrections system, we really need to get offenders closer to the community they're going back to. And historically, we haven't always done a great job with that.
Tell me a little bit, because our viewers may not know what we refer to as community corrections, because you and I have been involved in the field for many years. Explain it to the viewers.
Basically halfway houses. So they leave a prison proper with the fences and the razor wire, and they go to a halfway house in the community that's somewhat secure, but the offender has the ability to go in the community and do things like start getting jobs, which, as you know, is very important to keep people out. And really, the job piece, we're trying to turn tax burdens into taxpayers. You know, that's really what reentry is. Get people back to work and paying taxes instead of being a burden to the folks who are out there busting their tails working. So the community correction system allows us to do that, helps us get housing, and also gives us the ability to monitor. And when we see somebody who's not reentering appropriately, we can reel them in and sometimes return them back to the prison because clearly they're not ready.
So it's not uncommon that some of those people are brought back in.
It's not. And the key with community corrections system, we identify people who are higher risk and we put them in a more structured environment. So we can really monitor and see how their early adjustment is going. And that early adjustment period is essential for the future success and reduction in criminal behavior.
Well, as we know, in the past, in the last administration, Pennsylvania had to house a number of inmates out of state due to the lack of facilities, lack of beds here in Pennsylvania. Recently, you made a decision to return all the inmates from Michigan. I'd like you to tell our viewers about that.
Yeah. 2008, there was a parole moratorium that caused an increase in the population in the prisons to the point where there wasn't room for them. So Pennsylvania contracted with Michigan for 1,100 inmates and Virginia for 1,000 inmates. When we came on, during that period, the governor at the time authorized the construction of a bunch of housing units around the state. They started coming online early in our administration, so we made the decision to bring them back for a couple reasons. One, we talked about reentry and reintegration. Having individuals have contact with their families is an important part of that. So that was important to us. But probably more importantly, we have to spend money on corrections. We need to do a better job. We're working on spending it better, but we don't want to export those dollars out of state. We want the money spent on corrections to be spent on jobs for Pennsylvanians. So we felt like it was very important to bring Michigan back, and we're trying to identify how soon we can bring Virginia back also.
But that's good, because then we're not spending our money in Virginia, we're spending our money in Pennsylvania.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a very important part of what you have been looking at in getting our system back on track, because as we all know, it is one of the major cost drivers of the entire budget to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We'll be back in a moment with more of our conversation with Secretary John Wetzel.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by ReconnectPA.org, supporting a comprehensive transportation funding solution, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. I'm Governor Tom Corbett. We're going to continue our conversation with Secretary John Wetzel of our Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. John, when we broke, we were talking about moving prisoners back into Pennsylvania, but you also move prisoners around Pennsylvania. I understand that. How many corrections facilities do we have in Pennsylvania?
We have 27 if you include the boot camp.
And including the boot camp in those 27, how many prisoners is that roughly? Because I know that number changes every day.
It's roughly 45,000 in the prison system. Overall, about 51,000.
So 51,000 people we're taking care of. And that's a considerable cost, as I remember from the budget process, and considerably higher than it was in 1995 when Governor Ridge became governor. And a lot of that has to do with many different factors, including a lot of the legislation that has gone on in that period of time. But for the first time, I think we're starting to think smartly about how to move prisoners and getting them ready for when they are going to transition out and go into those community corrections facilities and go back into the community. Talk to me about that.
We have to get offenders closer to home. We have great communities in Pennsylvania, and we have great community groups. But quite honestly, the Corrections Department has not done a great job of engaging those community groups. So the closer we get offenders to home, as they get ready to go home, the better chance we have to connect them with those pro-social supports like faith communities. And those are the folks who keep people out of jail. We don't.
Absolutely. Well, and I think for our viewers' sake, I know one of the issues that we have is we have a pretty big facility in Forest County. How many inmates in Forest County?
2,300.
2,300. Now, I dare say a lot of people do not know where Forest County is. It's in the western north-central part of the state, and there are many more trees than there are people there. So there's not a support group there for those prisoners if they're going to get out from that facility, right?
Correct.
And one of the things I think you told me and the transition report told me is many of the prisoners there are from the southeast, from the Philadelphia region, and they're in an area where they don't have that contact with family that hopefully will support them when they get out. Is that one of your reasons to start moving them?
It is. It is, and especially as they get closer to release. The reality is we have 10,000 less beds in the east than we have inmates from the east, and vice versa in the west. So it's not, we can't have everybody close to home. But as they start getting closer to release, we need to start transitioning back to their area.
Good. I know you're also taking a look at the number of female inmates that we have, and for the first time, Pennsylvania will have a transitional women's facility as part of the redesigned state prison system. I understand we're going to put it in Montgomery County, that it's been projected for Montgomery County. Why is that so important as a part of the department's mission?
It's essential. Nearly 30% of our female inmates are from the southeast region, the Philadelphia area.
Say that number again?
Nearly a third.
Nearly a third, okay.
The closest facility to Philadelphia is in Lycoming County, Muncie, 140 miles, probably as the crow flies, perhaps. So we felt like it was essential. And when you're looking at female offenders, you're generally not just talking about the offender, but you're talking about an offender who is the primary custodial parent of a child. And while you know, clearly we have challenges, and we have to really focus on doing a better job of reducing our population and managing our population. We can't be so myopic, if you will, that we're not looking at that next generation. When female offenders, who are the custodial parents, re-enter and don't re-enter well and continue to live a life of crime, that impacts their children. And we have to be smarter than that.
Well, and you're right. I think you described it very well, how it affects the child and can affect it adversely, that they become members of the system down the road as they grow up. And that's that cycle that we want to break. Is that right?
Absolutely. And the opportunity to redesign the facility on the grounds of SCI Greaterford allows us the opportunity to design facilities that meet our mission and our vision. And I'm not sure that that's always been done, but it's being done now, and it's a great opportunity for us.
So when will that system go online?
The bids are due, I believe, at the end of the summer. So I'm not sure how the construction process works. I'm an optimist, so I'm going to say 3 years, but that's probably slightly optimistic.
It does take a long time. Well, Secretary Wetzel, I want to thank you so much for joining me today and taking time out of your busy schedule and for really helping to keep the people of Pennsylvania safe.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Welcome back. I'm now joined by Gene Barr, who's the Vice President of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. Gene, thanks for being here today.
Governor, great to be here.
Well, we did a lot of work in the last 6-7 months in Harrisburg. Got a budget done on time, reduction of spending in that budget, but we made some other legislation that was accomplished by the legislature, and I want to thank them for doing that. Some of that is the improvement of our unemployment compensation debt. We have a problem there, and we accomplished some results there this year. I'd like you to talk a little bit about that, including what else you think we need to do to address this problem.
You're right, we did have some improvements. In addition to the on-time budget, it was a budget with no new taxes or no tax increases, which the business community greatly appreciates when you compare that to what's happened in the past. We did have to address the unemployment compensation problem. We owe more than $3 billion to the federal government.
Now, say that again, because I don't think many of our viewers understand that.
We owe $3 billion. I used to call this the stealth deficit nobody talked about. Right. And the reason that we were in that position really didn't have a whole lot to do with the recession. It had to do with the fact that over the last 2 or 3 years, Pennsylvania spent more money on unemployment compensation benefits than any state except California. And at the same time, we have been in the top 10 in terms of unemployment compensation taxes that the business community pays. Highly taxed, highly benefit.
So we're collecting a lot of taxes,
absolutely,
but we're spending more than anybody but California.
And we're not the second most populous state, as you know.
No, we're not. We're 5 or 6, depending on when you look at it.
Exactly. So we've got to get a system that continues to provide benefits for the people that truly need it. The problem is we've got a lot of waste. In fact, the Obama administration has identified about a year or two ago $377 million a year lost to fraud, waste, and overpayments in the system. So what we're able to do, all of us working together over the last few months, is start to address that problem through the legislature.
Good. So if we do that, it's going to reduce our costs.
Absolutely.
But we still have to pay back $3 billion plus to the federal government. I don't think a lot of people understand that that's a debt that the legislature and myself as the governor, we're going to have to address how we do that and where we do that.
We've got to pay it back. We have to do a couple more things going forward. For example, we have an issue with people, and it's so frustrating for the folks who are in business, small businesses particularly, who have someone who voluntarily quits and winds up getting unemployment compensation. We have people who deliberately violate an employer's work rules, wind up getting unemployment comp. We were able in the last few months to finally change the fact that we were the only state in the United States that didn't force people getting unemployment comp to look for a job. The reality is getting somebody back to work as quickly as possible is the best thing for them, the best thing for the taxpayer, the best thing overall for everybody involved.
Well, I think many people in Pennsylvania, taxpayers included, believed that people were required to go look for a job. But you're just telling me right now.
We were the last state.
49 other states had it
Exactly.
in Pennsylvania. So now we're in with the other 50.
We finally changed it.
I would be hopeful, I'm sure you would be hopeful, that if that is the case, that we will at least be able to reduce the fraud, waste, and abuse, and also get people back to work.
Absolutely. That's the paramount thing. It's the best thing for them and their families, without a doubt.
Good. We also passed legislation dealing with legal reform. How do you see what impact did the old system first have on job creators, have on our hospital system, and have on local governments?
As you talked about it so much during the campaign, we had one of the worst legal systems in the United States. We were one of a handful of states that hadn't changed something called joint and several liability. And what that means is this. You could be 5% liable. And in fact, during the debate over this, somebody came to me and they were an attorney who represented a defendant who was 5% liable and wound up paying 100% of the damages in a case. That's not fair. It's the reason that more than 50 statewide associations came together representing business, small and large, hospitals, doctors, local government, who people don't understand are routinely sued. As a former local government official myself, and I know you were, you know how that legal side impacts them. We finally changed that system that said if you're 10% liable, you pay 10%. Now, if you're 70% liable, you can still be held liable for 100%. But our view, that's the fairest thing to do. We had situations where this was adversely impacting, for example, hospitals. There are places that didn't have adequate hospital facilities because the hospitals were viewed as the, quote, deep pockets. Plaintiffs' attorneys, and look, I don't blame them, that was available to them, would cast a wide net and sue everybody in sight, hoping to find that person they could drag into the case, hoping for the deep pocket, the person with a lot of insurance or a lot of cash, and make them potentially pay 100%.
Well, when we come back in our next segment, I want you to talk about how that affects our competitiveness.
Absolutely.
Because I think Pennsylvania needs to be more competitive with the other states in the union. We have to go to break right now, but we'll be back in just a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Welcome back to our final moments here on Pennsylvania Newsmakers. Gene Barr is here with me from the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. And Gene, when we broke, I was asking you the question, following up on the legislation with our legal system and the tort reform. How will this change in joint and several liability affect or help our competitiveness with the rest of the country?
Well, when people are looking where they're going to invest, whatever size business it is, or even where you're going to put a hospital, people are going to think a little bit about what their exposure is. And unfortunately, because of Pennsylvania's system whereby you could be perceived as the deep pocket, the person with a lot of money, you could come in and be 5%, people look at that and say, do we really want to be in Pennsylvania? It's one of the reasons why our job creation has lagged other states in this, here in this United States. We believe this is the first and most necessary step for broad-based legal reform, and we need to continue to address that. But it certainly creates that image and helps our image to say, okay, Pennsylvania's doing better on the legal reform side.
And have we seen that nationally? Has that become a story nationally to the businesses that are out there?
When you look at a state like Texas, they've got more doctors almost than they know what to do with these days because of the changes they've made.
And we could use those doctors back here.
We'd love to have those doctors back. They're creating jobs more than almost every other state. They're doing a phenomenal job. Much of that has to do with the legal reform efforts that have been undertaken in that state.
So it's not just Pennsylvania that is taking a look at legal reform. It is the rest of the country. Is that right?
And you bring up a great point. We're making reforms, but others are as well. This is like a race. The other side's running quicker, too. We got to pick up the pace, and we know we're going to be doing that over the next few years.
I would say one thing, when I'm out there on the road, I don't think a lot of people understand that we are competing with the other states and really competing with the world. We're on a national stage. It is a global economy in many ways, and we have to make ourselves competitive.
It is.
And in speaking of that, one of the things that can certainly have an effect upon our competitiveness is taxes and the corporate tax rate here in the United States, but particularly here in Pennsylvania. Can you talk to our viewers about that?
Our corporate net income tax rate is a major red flag for development. It's 9.99.
When you say red flag, you mean stop sign.
A bad stop sign. Iowa has a higher nominal rate, but it's graduated. We have probably the highest effective tax rate in the United States. When you combine it with the federal rate, we're the second worst in the world after Japan, and Japan's starting to cut their rate. As you point out, we're not in competition with Ohio and New Jersey and Maryland, not only with them. We're in competition with states and other countries. That's a huge red flag. In addition to that, our companies, large and small in Pennsylvania, pay a tax on their assets, and they pay that tax whether they make money or not. Now, fortunately...
What's that tax called?
Called the capital stock and franchise tax.
Explain that to me a little bit better, actually, to our viewers a little bit better.
It is a tax on assets, and it's a tax on what you own. It has nothing to do with whether or not you've made money in any given year. You pay that tax. Now, fortunately, your budget continued that phase out. It was supposed to have been done a couple years ago. It was increased 2 or 3 times in the last decade. Fortunately, I think we're one of only 2 states that charges that along with an income tax. That's going to be done in a couple of years, and that's absolutely crucial for business creation in this Commonwealth.
And I'm trying to explain this to our viewers, who many of them may not understand, that would be equivalent to saying that you're going to be taxed every year on all your possessions in your house.
Exactly right.
So that happens every year, year in, year out to the businesses.
That's exactly right.
The bottom line is what it means is jobs.
That's right.
Because I know we have been competing to bring jobs into Pennsylvania. All governors have been competing to bring jobs in. But when we have such a high corporate net income tax and high capital stock and franchise tax, that has affected our ability to do it.
And that's one of the things that's so crucial about this budget, because we didn't increase those taxes as we did in '91 when we had another huge budget deficit.
Well, we have a lot to do yet. I think it was a good year, good first 6 months. The legislature is off in recess until September. We have much to do when they get back, and look forward to doing that. Gene, I want to thank you for joining me here today. It was wonderful for you to join me. Secretary Wetzel joined us also. And I also want to thank Terry Madonna for the opportunity to host the show today. I hope he invites me back at some point in time, and hope that every one of you has a great vacation, what's left to it, summer break. And be careful out there, and I look forward to seeing you out on the road when I'm traveling Pennsylvania. Thank you for joining us today.